Take a DNA sample from anyone in Tokyo and about 4/5 of what comes back will look like the rest of East Asia. Ordinary. Expected. The same broad ancestry you would find in Seoul or in Shanghai. The other fifth matches nothing. Not Korea, not China, not Siberia, not any population living anywhere on Earth today. It is not a rounding error, and it is not background noise. It is roughly 1 part in 5 of the ancestry of 120 million people. Geneticists tried to place that fifth on the family tree of East Asian populations. It would not sit on the tree. It kept falling off the bottom of it. Because whatever this fifth is, it's separated from everyone else before there was an East Asia to separate from. The branch is older than the populations it is supposed to be a branch of. And that is only the first strange thing about it. The second is that for something like 15,000 years, the people who carried it barely mixed with anyone at all. The third is that their numbers stayed so low for so long that the calculation was checked twice. They left no written record. Nobody wrote anything down, because nobody there was writing. We know they existed because 1/5 of Japan is still made of them. A family tree of human populations is not a metaphor. It is a calculation. You take the genomes, you count the differences between them, and the mathematics tells you which groups split from which, and roughly in what order. Run that on East Asia, and it behaves. Han, Chinese, Koreans, Mongolians, the peoples of Eastern Siberia. They arrange themselves into a tidy set of branches. Then you add an ancient genome recovered from a hunter-gatherer burial in Japan, and the tidiness ends. It does not join the East Asian branches. It splits off below all of them at the base of the whole structure. In the language of the field, the lineage is basal. It comes off the trunk, not off a branch, which means the split happened before the populations we now call East Asian had finished becoming distinct from one another. The people who would become Han Chinese and the people who would become Korean were, at that point, still the same story. This lineage had already left it. The samples that show this come out of the ground in Japan. Hunter-gatherer burials, the oldest of them around 9,000 years old. Archaeologists had a name for the culture long before anyone could read its DNA. They called them the Jomon. It means cord-marked, after the pattern pressed into their pottery with twisted fibre. For most of a century, the Jomon were an archaeological question. What the pots meant, how the settlements worked, who these people were. Then the sequencing machines got good enough, and the Jomon became a genetic question instead. The answer that came back was not the one anybody had ordered. The clearest single answer came out of a shell mound on the coast of central Honshu, near the city of Tahara. A shell mound is exactly what it sounds like. Generations of discarded shells, fishbone and refuse, piled up until they became part of the landscape. All that shell does something useful. The calcium leaches into the soil and slows the chemistry that normally destroys DNA in buried bone. Which is why, at a site called Ikawazu, one particular skeleton was still readable when nothing else was. She was a woman late middle-aged when she died, buried with pottery that placed her firmly in the late Jomon. Radiocarbon put her at somewhere between 2,700 and 2,400 years old. In the literature, she has no name. She is IK002. The genome recovered from her was not spectacular by modern standards. Just under 2-fold coverage, meaning most positions in her DNA were read only once or twice. But the contamination was 0.5%. And that is the number that decides whether an ancient genome is worth anything at all. IK002 is the individual who put the Jomon at the base of the tree. And there was something else inside her, in the part of the DNA that passes only from a mother to her children. Her mitochondrial line belongs to a group called N9b. Among the Jomon, it was ordinary, common, unremarkable. In Japan today, Fewer than 2 people in every 100 carry it. Her people are a fifth of the country. Her mother's line has all but disappeared from it. At the height of the last ice age, the sea sat far lower than it does now. Enough water was locked into ice that coastlines all over the world stood well out from where they stand today. Japan was not the clean string of islands you see on a map now. The channels between it and the mainland were shallow, and in places they were not channels at all. Then the ice began to melt and the water came back. The shallow ground between the archipelago and the continent flooded. Somewhere around 17 to 16,000 years ago, the door closed. Whoever was already on those islands when the water rose stayed on those islands. The genetic estimate for when the Jomon lineage separated from continental populations lands in almost the same window, somewhere between 20 and 15,000 years ago. 2 entirely different kinds of evidence, geology and genomes, pointing at the same moment. There is a second way to express how early that split was, and it is the one that lands hardest. Geneticists can date when East Asians and Northeast Asians separated from each other. That division comes in at around 26,000 years ago. The Jomon lineage comes off before that. It is not an early branch of East Asians. It is older than the division that made East Asians a category in the first place. And then, for the whole of the next 15,000 years, almost nothing came in. That is the part that is genuinely difficult to find anywhere else. Populations leak. Neighbors marry neighbors. Traders leave children behind. A boat gets blown off course and does not come back. Across Eurasia, this happens constantly, and it shows up in a genome as a smear of foreign ancestry building up over time. In the Jomon, across thousands of years of burials, the smear is not there. There is a number geneticists calculate called the effective population size. It is not a head count. It is a measure of genetic diversity expressed as the size of an idealized population that would produce the diversity you're actually seeing. A real population is always bigger than its effective size, often several times bigger. For the Jomon, that number comes out at about 1,000, and it stays at about 1,000, not for a generation or two, across several thousand years of it. There were certainly more Jomon people alive than 1,000. Archaeology finds their settlements the length of the archipelago. What the number is telling you is something narrower and stranger. How few of them were passing their ancestry forward, and how completely closed the pool had become. A population that small and that closed for that long ought to be fragile. Inbreeding accumulates. Diversity drains away. Populations in that position frequently do not survive it. There are populations in the archaeological record that hit exactly that and simply stop. The sites go quiet, the burials end, and nothing follows them. There is also a price for surviving it, and it is written into the genome. A population that's small carries less variation than a large one, and less variation means fewer options when the world changes. The Jomon survived it for 15,000 years. And while they were doing it, they made something they had no business having. In 1998, at a site in northern Honshu called Odai Yamamoto, excavators recovered 46 pieces of broken earthenware. The fragments dated to roughly 16,500 years ago. That put them among the oldest pottery ever found anywhere on Earth. Which is a problem because of who made them. The standard order of human prehistory runs a particular way. People settle. People farm. People need to store and cook a surplus. People invent pottery. Pottery is supposed to arrive with agriculture. It is supposed to be a consequence of farming. The Jomon had no agriculture. They hunted, they fished, they gathered, and they were firing clay vessels thousands of years before anyone in the Near East or in Europe managed it. They were also in places not moving around very much, which hunter-gatherers are not supposed to do either. At Sanai Maruyama in Awamori, archaeologists uncovered a settlement that was occupied for something like 1,500 years. Pit dwellings, storage pits, rows of massive timber posts set deep into the ground for something the excavators still argue about. The vessels themselves are not crude either. The later Jomon styles are among the most elaborate ceramics made anywhere in the ancient world. Flame-shaped rims, deep sculptural coils, forms that serve no obvious practical purpose whatsoever. A few thousand people cut off on a chain of islands with no farming and no writing, making pottery that museums now light like sculpture. Whatever isolation did to the Jomon, it did not make them simple. Villages that stayed put without farming to hold them there. Almost everything about the Jomon runs slightly out of order compared with the rest of the world. And then, on the western edge of the islands, the order was broken from outside. Somewhere between 2,900 and 2,300 years ago, people began arriving in northern Kyushu from the Korean peninsula. They brought wet rice agriculture with them, flooded paddy fields, irrigation channels, and metal. This is the arrival Japanese history has always known about. It has a name, the Yayoi period. What the ancient genomes added was where those people had come from, genetically. Yayoi individuals sequenced from northwestern Kyushu carry a large component of Northeast Asian ancestry. The continental signature that Jomon had spent 15,000 years not acquiring. And in those same individuals you can already see the mixing happening. They are not purely continental. They carry Jomon ancestry too. The two populations did not replace one another cleanly. They merged. There is a way to check that timing from a completely different direction without touching a single potsherd. When two populations mix, the incoming ancestry arrives in long, unbroken stretches of chromosome. Every generation afterwards, recombination chops those stretches shorter. So the length of the surviving fragments is a clock. Long pieces mean recent mixing. Short pieces mean it happened a long time ago. Run that clock on the Jomon segments inside modern Japanese genomes, and it puts the main mixing event at 60 to 77 generations ago. Roughly 1,700 to 2,200 years ago, which is the Yayoi period arrived at from the genome alone. The pottery and the chromosomes agree with each other, and neither one was allowed to see the other's answer. For most of the last century, that was the entire story of Japanese origins, and it had a name of its own, the dual structure model. Jomon plus Yayoi. Two peoples, one population. It fitted the archaeology. It fitted the skeletal measurements. It fitted the pottery, and it fitted the rice. It survived, essentially unchallenged, for decades, until somebody sequenced a set of graves that nobody had thought to check. In 2021, a team led from Kanazawa University published 12 newly sequenced ancient Japanese genomes, combined with what had already been published that gave them 17 individuals. 9 Jomon, 2 Yayoi, and 3 from a much later period called the Kofun. The Kofun period is the one with the tombs. Vast keyhole-shaped mounds, some of them hundreds of meters long, raised for an aristocracy that was starting to look like a state. By this point, Japan is recognizably on its way to becoming a country. Nobody expected the genetics to still be moving. The 3 Kofun individuals came from the same burial site, and they did not look like a mixture of Jomon and Yayoi. They carried a third component, a widespread East Asian ancestry closest to Han Chinese populations that was not in the Yayoi samples at all. It had arrived afterwards. A third migration into a period everybody had assumed was already settled. The dual structure model had been the textbook answer for 2 generations of researchers. It was not so much wrong as unfinished. Japanese populations are not 2 peoples layered on top of each other. They are three: Jomon from the ice, Yayoi with the rice, and a third wave arriving late that nobody had a name for until the sequencing found it. And the arithmetic of those three is where the fifth comes from. In the same paper, the researchers estimated how much of each component survives in people living in Japan today. The Jomon share of mainland Japanese ancestry came out at about 15%, give or take 4. Later work with larger modern datasets and better ancient genomes pushed that estimate upward to around 18%, and in the newest high-coverage Jomon genomes to roughly 20. Call it a fifth? It is worth being exact about what that fifth is, because it is easy to hear it wrong. It is not a fifth of a person's body or their appearance or anything anyone could point at from across a room. It is a proportion of ancestry. Of everything that arrived in you from the past, roughly 1 part in 5 traces back to a population that stopped existing separately 2,000 years ago, scattered across the genome in fragments. Most of them short, none of them labeled, but it is not spread evenly across the country. In the Ryukyu Islands in Okinawa and the islands south of it, the Jomon share is higher, around 28%. And among the Ainu in the north, in Hokkaido, it is higher again, close to 80% of their ancestry. There is a gradient running the whole length of Japan, and it runs from the edges inward. The continental ancestry came in through the southwest and moved northeast. The further you get from that path, the more Jomon is left standing. The Ainu are not an isolated curiosity stuck at the top of the map. They are the part of the archipelago the later waves reached last. Same 3 ingredients everywhere. Different proportions depending on how far the rice and the tombs had to travel to find you. A single population holding 3 different arrival times inside it. So go back to the fifth that matched nothing. It matched nothing because there is nothing left to match it against. The Jomon are not a people who migrated away or died out or were wiped off the map. There is no country you can travel to and find them. There is no living group anywhere on the mainland that carries their branch. The only place that lineage still exists anywhere on Earth is inside the people of Japan. If you wanted to see what East Asia looked like genetically before East Asia existed, before the split that eventually produced the Han, the Koreans, the Siberians, there is exactly one place left to look. It is not a site. It is not a museum case. It is a blood sample from someone living in Tokyo or Osaka or Sapporo. 1 part in 5 of it is older than the category it gets filed under. There is one further oddity, and it was only noticed recently. Every population in the region carries a trace of DNA from Denisovans, an archaic human group that met modern humans on the way through Asia. The Jomon appear to carry the least of it of anyone in East Asia, an outlier in a second, completely independent way. A branch that left early, stayed small, stayed shut, made pottery before anyone should have, and then never entirely went away. Nobody in Japan is descended only from the Jomon, and nobody in Japan is descended from none of them. So, the vanished people are not a separate story running alongside Japan's. They are the oldest layer of it. They did not vanish. They were absorbed. And in a genome, being absorbed is not the same thing as disappearing.